Welcome to MCJ Report, ladies and gentlemen. On tonight's episode, we have a special presentation. We're going to be talking about 1,000 plus staff from the Catholic education system who have either been fired or are about to be fired or terminated, whichever way you'd like to phrase it, in relation to refusing to comply with the COVID jab mandate. That's right. So we're going to hear from several employees who have been let go of. We're also going to hear from a true industry insider, Aidan Mclinden, on tonight's show. Now, he was actually a wellbeing officer, and he was let go after he started asking too many questions. We're going to hear from some wonderful people from the Catholic education system. I sat down just the other day with Angelique, Catherine, Chris, and Ross, who have courageously offered to put their story out to the world, to let the public know what they've been through. And I can tell you these stories, they're absolutely heartbreaking. Stories of termination, people who have dedicated their lives to education, terminated suddenly. Some of them didn't even have the opportunity to say goodbye to their students. Others were actually threatened that if they were to enter school grounds, the police would be called. Now, let's face it, that is not an act that is in line with basic humanity. Why is it taking place? Also on tonight's show, we're going to hear from a true industry insider. That's right, Aidan Mclinden. Now, Aidan is actually a former member of the Queensland Parliament. He's our political strategist for our independent campaign as well. But let me tell you about his history and his work history in the Catholic education system. If there is one man who is truly qualified to be speaking on this topic, it is Aidan, and some certain remarks that he has made regarding this huge dismissal, which is largely being done behind closed doors. Now, I'm just going to pull up some remarks here. He's described this situation as one being based on a culture of fear and silence. Also mentioned by Aidan was that he was effectively blackmailed into signing an effective gag order. That's right. So they tried to stop him from speaking out about it and said, if you did, we'll cut your annual leave. So, I mean, this is just absolutely shocking. Let me tell you more about Aidan right here. Alrighty, so Aidan has a master's degree from the University of Melbourne with a double specialisation in leadership, management and student wellbeing. He has a degree in politics, majoring in public policy with a diploma of education. He taught in primary and secondary school for 6 years as a performing arts coordinator and wellbeing leader. He worked as a wellbeing education officer for Melbourne Archdiocese Catholic Schools, MACS, who oversaw the well-being of 80 primary and secondary schools in the southern Melbourne region. But unfortunately for Aidan, when he started sending emails, when he started raising questions about the jab mandate and whether or not proper care was being offered to teachers facing termination, he was shortly after dismissed himself. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that's enough from me. I'm going to hand it over to Aidan. He's going to speak for about 15 minutes, and then you'll hear from some of the courageous teachers who have unfortunately been stood down.
Well, thanks, Morgan, for this opportunity in highlighting one of the biggest injustices that Catholic education has seen in recent times. And this has been a cover-up that I'm compelled to share, given the amount of people, the amount of families that are hurting as a result of what's happened in the education sector, which has been largely covered up and swept under the carpet. And I feel the time is right now, as these teachers are facing termination of their employment, to highlight this, to say, well, hang on, is this the right thing to do? What is the Catholic education system in fact doing, and why they're being complicit in these atrocities? I would like to just recap on my story that hasn't been told, and I am glad that I didn't sign the silencing order I was given to not tell this story, and that is the reason I'm sitting here tonight, to tell that story. Had I signed that dotted line that blackmailed me into my long service leave or otherwise, whether they were going to pay that to me, I wouldn't be sitting here. And I think as a result of that, I can now tell my story. In mid to late September, when the mandates were being talked about and being introduced bit by bit in the public arena. At that point, it didn't really hit me that this would have an impact in the education sector. They sort of talked about the health industry and what may precipitate with the mandates in that. I then started receiving calls from teachers. It was sort of just one at a time, and one that stands out was a teacher who was pregnant, who was looking at having maternity leave the following year in term 1. And she called me absolutely distraught, and I tried to listen to her story, and after several minutes of her breaking down on the phone, I knew something wasn't quite right. I thought this must be an isolated case, and she obviously needed a health and wellbeing support plan that the organisation has a duty of care and responsibility to provide. But in talking to that teacher for some 30 to 40 minutes in terms of what the impact of a potential mandate that was incoming meant her family, they'd recently been married. The real estate agent had been at the house to put the for sale sign up, but they only bought 6 months prior because of this incoming mandate. And she was fearful that she was going to have a miscarriage as a result of the trauma of what this mandate would do to her and her family and her child. And it hit me starkly. I thought, hang on, this is just an isolated case, and we can manage and work through this. Not until the next day and the next day following did it hit me that this is actually going to be a widespread problem. More and more teachers began to call me, and I thought at that point I better put an email out to say, hang on, channel these issues to me, and I can see what I can do from an organisational point of view as a wellbeing and education officer in the Melbourne Archdiocese Catholic Schools, to ensure that we could provide the necessary support through our systems in place and processes and protocols for the organisation to be able to assist these people. And I actually didn't think it was going to be an issue, because the directives that were given had never said that the mandate had to affect Catholic schools. We are a point of difference. The reason the Catholic education system exists is that point of difference. So a government directive doesn't necessarily need to transpire within the Catholic paradigm. So I thought, this is okay. We're going to be safe from this. Yes, it might meet a bit of a resistance and say, okay, thanks Dan Andrews and your cronies, whatever you've decided to try and tell and direct the Catholics to do, but we're a point of difference, and you do what you feel is necessary for a government directive in the government school system. That certainly shouldn't apply to us. Unfortunately, that was not the case. And the Catholic education system has been complicit in rolling out those directives in a much stronger and heartless and brutal way than I ever imagined possible. And sitting at home, working from home, and receiving call after call after call, I then decided that this is going to be a big, big problem, and I need to let my chain of command know, my general manager, the director of learning services, and indeed the acting executive director at the time. So I outlined some of the critical issues of teachers who had raised with me that they had suicidal ideation, they had depression, they had insomnia, they weren't able to sleep, they were arguing with their spouse and partners, their families were starting to shake. And I thought, this is completely unnecessary. And when they introduced the notion of this mandate, despite the health and the Hippocratic health oath and the informed consent, which has always been the case to induce any form of medication into one's body, I would never imagine in my lifetime that could be connected to your employment or otherwise. And it fundamentally goes against the Christian ethos, every facet of the Christian ethos. In fact, the Vatican has stated itself in its own congregation of the Doctrine of Faith in October of 2020 that vaccinations, and this is in specific reference to the COVID-19 vaccinations, must at all times be voluntary, and it is not a moral obligation. Point blank, full stop. That's called free will, that's called informed consent. And we also, through Pope Francis, has said that he will never tire of advocating for the dignity of work. Now, on these two fundamental principles, what was happening and what is happening in Victoria is fundamentally wrong. It's fundamentally anti-Christian, and I will go so far as to say that it's evil. And it's when good people are silent that evil prevails. And I'm not going to be one of those people. And when I started emailing my chain of command and waiting a day and 2 days and 3 days and 4 days for a reply in the hope of a reply, I did not so much as get any reply or anything in writing returning my email. Now, when you're talking about critical incidents here, critical incidents is where somebody's life has been threatened or is in jeopardy of having adverse impacts due to an organisational instruction. And it then hit me that, hang on, I'm actually now operating in a culture of silence and fear. If my chain of command are not returning to their calls of help to me, then what hope have any of these teachers got? And I oversaw 80 schools in the southern region of Melbourne, which covers from Richmond all the way down to Portsea at the end of the Mornington Peninsula. And I had a duty of care individually to the well-being of the teachers and the knowledge that I knew and what needed to be done. It was at that point that I decided that I'm going to call for a delegation of teachers, an urgent delegation of teachers and staff to the Archbishop, Peter Comensoli, to highlight the need of what is happening just in case that the Archbishop wasn't aware of what was going on. I then decided to send an email out, a support of health and wellbeing care package to all the principals in the Melbourne Archdiocese Catholic schools to let them know that if they had teachers struggling in this mandated space of whether they were vaccinated, unvaccinated, hesitant, wanted more information, I told them it was not a black and white issue. Here's our health and support care packages. I referred them to Headspace, to Lifeline, to Vinnie's, to Beyond Blue, to the anti-bullying sites, everything that we have been espoused as wellbeing leaders to promote within the school systems. In doing so, I got an overwhelming positive response from the teachers and the principals saying, thank you so much for sending this out. We've had no direction. We can now disseminate these resources to the school. Then about 3 hours later, as I was typing away, the cursor came up on my screen and started moving around without my control. And then my computer was frozen and it said that I had disabled access. So within 3 hours of sending this email out to Victorian principals, Max, through their wisdom, had decided that they better shut my computer down because it obviously had resonated back to them that finally they've been hearing something in this area. The next day, I then received a 4-page letter from the Director of Services Learning outlining that I had willfully misrepresented the organisation and that I would face the potential prospect of termination. This document that was served upon me also gave me a directive not to talk to anybody in the organisation, including those associated with the organisation. So that's parents. We have 350 schools in the Max Diocese. You're talking parents, 150,000 students. They effectively gave me a directive to silence, to go to ground, not to say anything, and to show cause. During this time, I had much time to reflect and contemplate. However, the teachers kept calling me, and increasing story began to show that this was widespread. It was an issue that wasn't going to go away, and that these teachers and these staff were in monumental pain and could not understand why the Catholic system was enforcing these directives further than the government would themselves. Meanwhile, understanding that these teachers, for the best part of 18 months, had been doing online Zooms and teaching the children in their care every single working day throughout lockdowns. The capacity for them to do this and to adapt accordingly to continue the education process had been refined. The mandate never said that, the mandate to the directives was that they were not to step foot on the school grounds or be at the workplace. Well, they hadn't stepped foot and been at the workplace for the last 18 months. Nowhere does the mandate say that somebody's job will be terminated for making an informed choice of not to put a trial drug in their body. Nowhere does it state it. And therefore, you can only imagine that the legal eagles are sitting on the sidelines and will have an absolute field day when those businesses and organisations choose to terminate people over exercising their free will. This is Australia. And it was just so sad to see that when you started joining the dots, this was merely nothing short of a massive cover-up by the Catholic education system. A culture of silence and fear had prevailed. The more questions I asked, the less people spoke to me. I have now on not less than 4 occasions asked the Archbishop for a delegation. I've contacted Jim Miles, the Executive Director. I am still yet to hear a reply from anybody. This is a gross negligence to the teachers in the duty of their care, including the students. And the Catholic Class Action Collective have contacted me to assist in their cause of more than 1,000 staff across Melbourne Archdiocese who have been or in the process of being terminated. And the stories that have come through and the dossiers that have been collected is heart-wrenching. What these teachers have been subjected to in their school environments is nothing short of disgusting. These teachers have suffered humiliation, segregation, open Google documents of their full medical records, not just their vaccination status. A complete abuse of the Privacy Act. A complete abuse of people's free will and informed choice. The Christian ethos has gone completely out the window. And I cannot but help to think that the top echelons in the hierarchy of the Catholic Church in the Melbourne Archdiocese have been completely hijacked by self-interest, by greed, by everything that the Bible espouses. They have completely ignored and sidelined. These are people's lives, these are people's families, these are people who have been in the Catholic Church since childhood, and they've been completely dismissed like they don't exist. Many of these teachers still have their belongings at the school. Hundreds of teachers have been told that if they step foot on school grounds, that they will be called by the police will be called in. Hundreds of teachers haven't even heard from Max since October, November. They don't even know where they stand. They don't even stand where they stand in their employment. There's some stories of teachers, which all been documented, of their long service leave and entitlements being held to ransom because they've chosen not to put a trial drug in their body. How does any of this make sense? It is wrong, it is cruel, it is unjust. And the Archbishop, along with Jim Miles, the Executive Director, have a clear duty of care to these teachers, to these families, to their community as the leaders of this flock, to get a backbone, to man up and make sure that justice is sought. Because I can guarantee you, hundreds and hundreds of teachers in one diocese are already doing that. And there will be more, and at one day we'll look back at this and be ashamed that this was ever able to take place. This is an absolute stain on Catholic education. The amount of hurt that these teachers and these families have been put through, no amount of time will ever be able to heal the pain that they've been subjected to. This is a story that needs to be told, and it will be told time and time again. They will be seeking justice. And I know in my own personal experience with them that I received a termination letter 13 minutes before reaching 7 years of long service that actively prevented me from accessing my 9 weeks, knowing full well that on the 28th of January was the 7-year mark of when my 7 years of service had kicked in and I was eligible to have a break as a thank you for the work I'd done. 13 minutes. Now, if that's what I've witnessed, and I was inside the bureaucracy of Max, then I can only imagine what these teachers have been treated like when they've just been another number on a piece of paper. None of them were able to say goodbye to their colleagues or children. None of them were welcome to the Christmas party. In fact, there was being directives by some principals not to talk to them at all, in or outside of the school, of the school system. This is an absolute abrogation. It cannot continue like this in a free country like Australia and accept that this is just the norm now. Many teachers were not even notified that this would be happening. Parents in a newsletter were saying that they wanted to spend more time with families so they won't be coming back. Children are asking questions. It is scandalous what has happened. It will be brought to light. Yes, it will be painful. But the truth can be painful sometimes, but it has to be dealt with. And I'm just so glad now that I will not be silenced. I will not sign a piece of paper and be blackmailed to hide my story, to protect myself, and to get the 30 pieces of silver to ensure that I cannot verbally announce what has been happened to over 1,000 staff. And another example, just to finish off, is a lady that's been behind the front desk for over 20 years. She'd been at the school for 2 generations. She'd seen the children come through when she started and their children's children. And she's absolutely heartbroken. And her mental health and well-being has been so compromised, it will never be the same again. She has served her whole life and most of her working life tirelessly for the Catholics and been treated as subhuman. It's disgusting, it is wrong, and I'm calling on you, Peter Comensoli, to step up to the plate and be a leader of your flock. Get the backbone that you need, that you've been appointed to oversee the 350 schools and the 20-odd thousand teachers in your care, and step up to the plate and start putting the words that you say behind the pulpit into action, because the time is now.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are here with 4 great and brave individuals. We have Angelique, Catherine, Chris, and Ross. They have kindly stepped forward in a very courageous manner to share their stories with us in relation to the education system. Of course, we're referring to the Catholic education system here. Their stories, their experience, and what they have been through, so unfortunately, during this period of COVID and mandates, but mandates that have expanded out of the government. So we're going to get started with Angelique. So Angelique, would you mind sharing with us a bit of your experience, what you've done, and the experience that you have lived during this time?
Hi, I'm Angelique. I became a learning support officer last year after a couple of years' study. I previously worked in the science industry for the last 20 years, have done a degree in science and worked in hospitals, and have been working in a hospital for the past almost 10 years. Transitioned to school where I was working at a Catholic primary school in a grade prep classroom for the last year. I was solely working with a child with diabetes. I was doing his injections, monitoring his highs and lows, and administering all his medications. I also worked during the lockdowns on site, supervising classrooms, mainly the junior classrooms, preps 1s and 2s. When the mandate was announced, both for education and healthcare, I started to panic actually, because I'd already been researching the vaccine previously as a hospital worker, and to me things just didn't add up. I didn't understand how they could produce a vaccine within such a short time. So I started frantically researching more as the mandates grew closer. Had spoken to my principal at the school, saying to him I was unsure if I was going to get the vaccine, never disclosed whether or not I was actually going to get it. He seemed to be quite helpful and thoughtful at the time. He basically said that it's your decision and only you can make it. Then with the mandate growing closer, and we got more and more letters, and we were encouraged in the school system to get vaccinated, it became more real that if I didn't, then I would lose my job both at primary school in Catholic education and in healthcare in the hospital. I decided in the end not to disclose my vaccination status in both areas. I was subsequently terminated in the hospital in December. They withheld my long service leave, and the school, I was basically told not to come onto the premises. I had basically no communication between the school and myself, apart from one telephone call to say, please call me. Please, it was the principal, and please call me. And that was early in November. I was told in front of all of the staff that my contract would be renewed in January, as I was only on a 1-year contract. However, the school just let that lapse, and There was no communication on whether it was going to be renewed, whether I was going to get paid holiday pay. So I was basically sitting in limbo from October when the mandate came in. Fortunately for me, I got to say goodbye to my classroom, and that was probably one of the hardest things that I could do. I was only there for a year, but I grew to love the kids. Little preppies starting out have had a really hard life in the last 2 years with all the lockdowns, no socialisation. Kids should be getting this. So on my last day, which was the Monday that we were meant to be vaccinated on, my principal said I could stay on site until lunchtime and that he would pay me for the day and that I could say my goodbyes to the kids. And they were absolutely beautiful. I got 25 prep kids hugging me and crying and asking me why I had to leave. I couldn't tell them, they wouldn't understand. And then from that day on, there was no communication. And what I fear for most is in the education system, our children are missing out. There's not enough staff in the classrooms. Our story's not getting out into mainstream media. People need to understand that there are a lot of teachers, a lot of support workers, librarians, all people in the classroom that have decided to go against this mandate, have either been terminated or are going to be terminated, and we've lost a huge amount of years of experience that these kids are going to be missing out moving forward.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this with us, Angelique. What a tragedy and such a deprivation of education to these children as well. It's a huge injustice. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Pleasure.
Catherine, thank you very much for being here. Another brave soul standing up and speaking out. A similar experience, unfortunately, and I'm sure there's many experiences like this throughout the country right now and throughout the whole world. Would you mind sharing your story with us, your experience, and your experience in terms of work and your experience in terms of this miscarriage of justice?
Sure. I've been a teacher for 24 years, mostly in performing arts, but I'm a primary teacher. I've taught specialist maths, science, all sorts of things, been a librarian. But I took time off to look after my son when he was born, and he started prep last year, so it was time to get back into the workforce. I did some CRT work at my son's school, mostly, and then I found the perfect job. Well, I thought it was the perfect job for me, teaching performing arts at another school. So I juggled looking after my son, teaching performing arts 2 days a week, and CRTing. Third term I was basically full-time with all of that. And then I started to notice some things happening in the media which worried me. I saw all the protests that were happening, the construction industry, and I thought, I was sort of hoping that they would win some battles with that, because I knew we were going to be next, and I'd done a fair bit of research over the last year or even more, and I wasn't too happy with the mandate, the idea of a mandate, and I wasn't too happy with the vaccines. But I held out hope, because the construction industry were fighting, but unfortunately the first week of the holidays, and we knew what was going to happen on the holidays when we were all separated from each other, there was no one to talk to, they mandated that teachers needed to take it. And I think that first hour when my husband came in and told me that, I was shaking, I couldn't speak. I think I cried. I can't even remember. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to take it, but I knew I had to take it if I was going to have a job, and I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. Anyway, my husband said, go and see your doctor, which we all know seeing a doctor these days means that they're going to try to convince you to take the jab. I saw my doctor. I asked for an exemption, which I knew she couldn't give me. And I saw a lawyer. The lawyer told me he didn't really care. So I thought I was pretty much alone. But in the end, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't go through with it. I got a letter, an email from my principal 2 days after the mandate saying, let us know what your status is. Tell me I need to know early what you're going to do. But this was just a general letter to all their staff, so I still didn't say anything. I thought to myself, well, what do I do? What do I do? So I went to school for the first 2 weeks of the term, and it wasn't until the second week where I said, I'm not able to comply. My principal then said, you're not allowed on site. I wasn't allowed to say goodbye to the students. I had been teaching remotely anyway, so all my performing arts lessons were videos. I did try to put out a little 45-second video saying it's been lovely teaching you. I'm sorry I have to go. Nothing to do with mandates or vaccines or anything, but apparently that was against protocol and was taken off. I don't know what the protocol is. So I was left without a job. I didn't get asked to do any more CRT work, understandably. But I think probably the hardest thing for me was not necessarily losing the job, because I knew it was the right thing to do, because I don't believe anyone should be blackmailed to do anything. So I'm standing up for my son and teaching him that blackmail is wrong. But the hardest thing for me was the first time after I had lost my job, turning up to the school that I was CRTing with my son who goes to that school, turning up to drop him off, knowing that all the teachers around me know I am no longer able to be employed. All the parents not even worrying about anything, not even caring that teachers have lost their jobs, that students have lost their teachers, that I will no longer be teaching their children, and them not caring, the other parents not caring, and me having to drop my son off at school, not knowing that in the future I still won't be able to take him into the classroom, and I'm not. All the other parents are allowed into the classroom to drop their children off. I'm still not allowed to take my son in. And to me, I'm a parent who wants to be involved in my son's life and wants to be involved in teaching the children, and I'm not allowed to be part of my son's education anymore according to the state or other children's education, and that is what is really sad for me.
That's horrible, and I can only begin to imagine how traumatic that would have been, being notified of your termination, not being able to properly say goodbye to your students. Would you mind talking a little bit about how did you feel in that moment of termination and being essentially exiled from the school? And were there any health and wellbeing measures implemented to help you with the very difficult transition of going from working as a teacher to not working?
Well, I was actually quite shocked, and it wasn't an email, but well, maybe it was an email. An email was sent saying that there were 2 of us not allowed to continue on our staff, but for personal reasons. So they didn't mention why, and teachers were told to keep this private and to allow these teachers, us, to be private about it. So basically they were told not to talk to us, and they didn't. So there was no communication between myself and the rest of the staff. My principal has really not communicated much at all. I haven't really had much communication. I've tried, I've gone through Red Union, but because I was on a contract, it's kind of tricky. They've just ended my contract. So I knew this was going to be the end. I kind of knew that. I'm more upset that people haven't cared enough to speak to me. You know, I feel like I'm doing this for my son. I knew what was going to happen, and I hope to be able to get a job again one day, but I have to fight this for my son. So the lack of communication was sad, but kind of expected. I knew my staff weren't going to accept my decision because they had not been happy with people who were protesting and fighting against the mandates before we were mandated. So,
Well, I commend you, and I know that I speak on behalf of many people, thousands of people that are watching this broadcast, that we're with you, we're supporting you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have Chris over here walking in the same shoes. Chris, would you mind telling us your story, your experience, and what it's been like for you?
Yeah, sure, Morgan. Thanks for the opportunity too. My experience is similar to my colleagues, but what I wanted to point out was just the number of colleagues. We've estimated since this group's formed, and we've only been around for a very short amount of time, that we're talking about a lot of the workforce. So the Melbourne Archdiocese and the other archdioceses around Victoria, they're a big employer. And we're estimating numbers well exceeding 1,000 at the moment, and we're reaching out to those people because as we've heard here, there was virtually no welfare support offered by the employer at the time that people were given their marching orders from their usual place of work. So I was in that similar situation along with a couple of my colleagues. We were denied entry to the workplace, and then we looked at our options to try and work out a plan, and we have taken our matter to the Fair Work Commission. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get a decision in our favour, and I think that's becoming apparent around Australia at the moment, is the Fair Work Commission is not actually supporting workers in terms of their rights in the workplace. There's general protections, including coercion and other forms of protection, which are actually in the Fair Work Act, yet we've had very limited success in getting any support from the Fair Work Commission. So we're looking at other options. Legal options are something that we really need to start investigating, and we know that as recently as a few weeks ago, we've got senators coming out and trying to expose the lack of health information that supports these mandates. And I know that we've had some of the braver politicians in the Victorian Parliament, and I think David Limbrick would be one that comes immediately to mind, has tried to actually get information from the Victorian government to show where the health advice is coming from. And we strongly suspect that, like South Australia, there is very limited health advice that supports the mandate. So our situation is that the Melbourne Archdiocese of Catholic Schools is willingly and readily supporting the Victorian government, and we've noted that the paperwork that the Melbourne Archdiocese use resembles very closely the same paperwork that's being used in the Victorian public sector. So I'm of the mindset that there may be enough information that we're gathering as a collective now to suggest that the Melbourne Archdiocese is working very constructively with the government to try and make sure that they have the same type of information and paperwork templates that are being put out to their employers.
Right. And what do you think that means for the church moving forward? Many people, of course, enrol their kids in the Catholic education system expecting a certain code of ethics, but if this particular education system is in lockstep with the government, which we're all here today because we consider the government to be acting in a non-ethical manner, where does this leave the church?
Yeah, it leaves them in a situation where they're going to have to explain to a large amount of people what they're actually planning to do, because the Melbourne Archdiocese has been approached formally by this group in a very well constructed letter suggesting we need an urgent delegation to discuss these issues. And that's been met with absolute silence, which comes as a shock to me because I've been involved with the Catholic Church since I was at school myself, and I've taught at 2 Catholic schools, and I've invested heavily in the Catholic system, and I expect a lot better. I really do. We have principals who are saying things along the lines of we're simply passing on this information, yet they're making an active decision to play their role, in my opinion. So I've made a decision, and my decision was to suggest to my employer that under the privacy legislation, it's inappropriate to ask people questions about their vaccination status. Now, I would have thought that argument would have been entertained, yet we've heard now from the Melbourne Archdiocese management that they simply are passing on the obligations under the Health and Wellbeing Act. And we don't believe that to be true. We actually think there's a lot more to be said in terms of the Melbourne Archdiocese role as a corporation and where that fits in under the Fair Work Act and the Corporations Act.
Sure.
They're not as obligated as I think they're leading us to believe at the moment.
Yeah, acting under the Public Health and Wellbeing Act, I've heard similar statements from Victoria Police and
Yes.
a whole range of other institutions. Right, just to finish it off, if you had a message for the Archdiocese right now, if he was listening, what would you say?
Well, it's simply just to make contact with us. We've been willing to negotiate this from the word go, and we're now being put in a situation where we believe our legal rights are being compromised. So we are happy to negotiate an outcome which would suit everyone that's been affected, and we're more concerned about our students, and we're more concerned about the people that at the moment are being put in a situation where they don't have the quality of education that they're paying for, because I think that a lot of schools at the moment are just trying to cover shortages, and this is only going to get worse, I think, because with another booster shot looming on the 25th of this month, I would suggest some teachers may be umming and ahhing about their own particular situation, and they may be reluctant to go ahead and continue with this situation of taking booster shots. Now, if that happens, there's going to be amazing shortfalls in the Catholic sector in terms of the workforce. So I just predict it's going to get harder.
Thank you.
At the moment.
Thank you. We hope that he listens. Right, now, finally, we have Ross over here. Ross, thank you very much again. Would you mind sharing with us your experience in education and also your experience during this traumatic
Thank
time?
you, Morgan.
Thank you.
I'm a teacher in the VEC sector in boys private school up in the northern suburbs. I've been teaching a furnishing program for the last 7 years. Well, this would have been my 7 years. When the mandates came into play, or the vaccines came into play, I did a bit of investigation about some of the effects that vaccines would be a part of the person. So I sort of refused to take them. I was then put on leave without pay until I had sort of given the school an informed decision on what my decision was going to be at the end of the year. I primarily still haven't received any vaccines. Obviously, with the information that's coming out at the moment, it's making my decision quite clear that I don't want to be taking these vaccines. And I've had some correspondence with the school during our term break with my intent of what my intentions were for this year. With that, I had a show clause letter that I explained my situation and my intent, and that was held a couple of weeks ago, and I'm still waiting for an answer whether my position's still available at the school or whether I've been terminated. I haven't had any correspondence, anything apart from just a few emails with my school, so I'm just sort of still waiting in limbo with what my fate is with my school. I haven't had any correspondence up to date, so I still don't know where my fate lies.
Thank you very much. And Ross, would you mind explaining how does it feel to be left in the dark like this after all your service?
Quite disappointing after all the time and services that I've given to my school, just to be sort of left out there not knowing what my fate is, because I know that my department is struggling with finding a replacement teacher, and just not knowing where I'm sitting with that is quite disturbing.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't deserve it. Thank you very much for sharing that. Before we wrap this up, I'd like to ask anybody sitting on the table here today for any final closing comments, any messages perhaps to the schools that you once worked for, the Catholic Church, anything you'd like to say. So I'll just open the floor here.
Well, yeah, thanks, Morgan. Just quickly, we have heard today that staff members are receiving their termination notices from schools, which is alarming because at this particular point in time, we don't think there's a sufficient argument to actually do that. Yeah. There's just been a failure to communicate with staff, and I would just hope that anyone who's either receiving information from their principal or has been put in that similar situation to make contact with us, because we are looking at a class action if necessary to try and reduce some of these problems. So yeah, hopefully if people see this broadcast, they'll get in contact with TCAC or the Catholic Class Action Collective, and we've only been around for a short amount of time, but we've already got a huge membership. So yeah, we're very positive about what we can actually achieve as a group.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And for anyone looking to get in contact, the email is along the bottom banner of this video and in the description. Angelique,
I just want to
please.
say one brief comment. Thank you very much. I just want to say to Catholic education, start acting with your conscience, start using your morals, and start acting in unity for humanity. This is for everybody. This is for everyone here today. This is for all the teachers, all the workers, all the students out there. Start using your morals.
Absolutely. You said it best. Use your morals. Catherine, would you like to make a closing statement?
I'll echo what Angelique said. This is a moral issue. It isn't a scientific issue. There's science on both sides, but it is moral, completely a moral issue, and that's where I stand with Angelique on this.
Very, very well said. Ross, would you like a closing statement?
That's what you preach. We believe in our Catholic education, our Catholic faith. Just practice what you preach. That's what we simply ask for. Nothing more than that. And Angelique said, comply with what we are wanting to achieve, basically. Yeah.
All right. I'd like to thank everybody for sharing your stories. Very powerful. A strong message out there. Of course, to the education system, the Catholic education system. Practice what you preach. If you preach humanity, act in accordance with humanity, not in accordance with what we consider to be an inhumane and corrupt government. So, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.